Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Before we get started here, I want to thank the head of school, Mr. Brumsicle, and Mr. Monroe, Dr. Melton, Mr. Geoff, and Ms. LaRue. They have been extremely helpful in helping to orchestrate this whole series of events this week. So rarely does a thing like this happen with just one person being involved. Last Friday, you saw the Powtoon presentation that I put together last year. And that was the presentation, as Mr. Monroe said, that got everything rolling. It got your parents interested in having these speakers here with us this week. And that was key in making this happen. And if that Powtoon taught us anything at all, it's that your parents feel like I do, and feel like the rest of the teachers here, that service learning, volunteer efforts, and community projects are an absolute integral part of a 21st century education. Geoff Morgan and I met taking geography courses in university. We taught together for a few years in London, England, and I think we've known each other for somewhere around 20 years now. I'm honored to have Geoff as a friend. I have tremendous amount of respect for him as a teacher, a principal, public speaker, and idealist, and I'm truly inspired by his work with building walls of wisdom. Geoff has the opportunity, and he'll speak about that a little bit more, but to meet a number of amazing people in his work and in his travels, and we're really fortunate that joining Geoff this week, we also have the Director of Chapter Relations at Building Walls of Wisdom, and also the Principal at the Lincoln School in Kathmandu, Mr. Kemp Fernandez. And one more time, without any further ado, let's have another round of applause and welcome for Mr. Morgan.
Great hug. Good afternoon. This is my first trip to Mont'Kiara. What a beautiful campus you have here. Amazing facilities, wonderful teachers. Well, for the most part. My condolences for you that have put up with Mr. Baker. I've known him a long time, I know how hard that is. And what a good-looking group of students. Yeah. I don't know if it's the humidity that keeps you guys looking young or all the stairs in this place, but yeah, keep it up. Do you ever think about how lucky you are to go to a school like this? Do you ever think about all the gifts that you've received in life? Or wonder why we live in a world with 5-star hotels, fancy restaurants, and an endless number of luxuries, yet some people can only dream of having enough food to eat, a warm bed to sleep in, or an opportunity to go to school? Raise your hand if you've ever thought about the inequalities that exist in our world. If you've ever even spent a moment thinking about why some people have so much and others so little. Good for you. I believe that this is the first step, and that each of you is capable of doing beautiful things in our world. This afternoon, I want to share with you what I have learned about global poverty over the last 10 years. Talk about a nonprofit organization that I founded building schools, and invite you, challenge you to think about how you can create a more compassionate, equal, and peaceful world for our next generation. I didn't always know my responsibility to others. For me, this didn't happen until much later in life. But when it happened in a single instant. Have you ever looked at the face of a child born in poverty? Not glanced at pictures on the internet or TV, or maybe quickly walked past somebody on the street, but really looked into their eyes, beyond the surface, into the depths of who they are. It was in Sierra's eyes that I saw a type of courage and fearlessness that would change my life forever. It was in her eyes that I realized that she is no different than you or I. And I knew that from that moment forward, I would do everything I could to save this 12-year-old girl from her life of impoverishment. Each of us is capable of doing beautiful things in this world. Before I tell you about how I met Sierra, I would like to share this photograph. This is one of my favorite photographs. It was taken by astronauts aboard Apollo 17 during the last manned mission to the moon. Since then, no human being has been far enough to capture a full Earth image. It is timeless, it is universal, and it represents the only place to our knowledge in the entire universe that can support our fragile human lives. This is where 50,000 years of human history has taken place. All of the world wars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the discovery and extinction of species. This is where everything has been invented. All of the music composed, all of the art created, and this is where every last love story has taken place. I sometimes look at this photograph and I think what a wonderful perspective the distance of 45,000 kilometers offers us. From this distance, you can't see the borders of our countries, the color of our skin, or the amount of money in our bank accounts. From this distance, you begin to see that we are all in this together, and that our collective human story is one. I understand we are living in a complicated world, and that your generation is going to face unprecedented challenges. So when you want to make a difference, it is difficult to know where to begin. This afternoon, I would like to begin in sub-Saharan Africa, where a great deal of challenges exist, specifically in Ghana, in a community called Yapala that is made up of mainly farmers who survive on less than $1 a day. And the total literacy rate in this village, the amount of people who can read or write, is just 3%. But unfortunately, in rural Africa, there's very little money for schooling. And in the video I'm about to show you, I want to invite you to think about what it would be like to grow up in this village, what it would be like to go to school in this village.
So the first day I got to this school, after speaking with the head teacher and then interacting with the children, I realized that these are serious people that need help. So if there is a need, if we can, why don't we come to these people's aid since they are so serious about education?
Can read about 2-3 days consecutive. That means we are not going to have classes, and it affects my teaching and then the learning of the children too.
Site ti kuji class kama sa word site ku shete yiso ti to close so to check to come.
Right now, this school is from KG1 to P6. It is my hope to see them going to JSS, and in the future, I want to see them also attending SS and other institutions.
We have some settlements here, some especially these Fulanis. I have a lot of them in my school here. So if the new structure is being put up to us, to see that they themselves, they also try to bring more of their children to us so that we'll get more enrollments, especially the girl child. I've been talking to them about the girl child.
Thank you. My own childhood was remarkably different than these children growing up in rural Ghana. I grew up just outside of Toronto, Ontario, and I had a happy, peaceful childhood, full of long bike rides, endless games of street hockey, and fishing trips on the weekend. At this time in my life, unlike you, I was vaguely aware of the world beyond my small town. And the only exposure I had to poverty was often through TV commercials that was full of images of starving African babies with flies in their faces and distended stomachs. And these commercials made me feel horrible. And I have to admit, when they came on, I would change the channel. I used to think to myself, what difference could I possibly make? Although I was aware of some of these inequalities, I didn't feel like I had the power to change anything. In high school, I was a dedicated student and athlete. And in case you're curious, I'm the good-looking guy in this photograph. The one standing next to the coach with that beautiful head of hair. Yeah. A lot has changed since high school. During this time in my life, I didn't spend a lot of energy thinking about other people, especially not people halfway across the world that needed my help. I had other plans. I was destined to earn a degree from a top university, start a career, get married, buy a home in a good neighborhood, and then eventually, after a long, successful career, retire, preferably somewhere on a beach with palm trees where I could kick back and enjoy life. But it was during my time in university that I began to question this picture of a perfect life that is so often sold to us. A life about status and recognition. A life about accumulating and consuming. And as I began to question this picture, I began to realize that we don't just see the world, we interpret it through very specific ideas that we inherit through our education, through our culture, and largely through marketing and media. It is easy to see how people begin to think that life is all about them, when our lives have become polluted with a constant stream of messages telling us that we are not skinny enough, that our clothes are no longer cool, or urging us to splurge on ourselves. And as these feelings began to surface with increasing frequency and intensity, I went out and I bought a map of the world, and I hung it above my desk at university. And I would often stare at that map, daydreaming, thinking about visiting other countries and exploring different cultures. Somehow I was convinced that there must be more to it. And so 1 week after graduating from university, I went out and I bought a large purple backpack. And I know what you're thinking, but purple was very cool at the time. And then I left. I left everyone and everything I have ever known in search of a more meaningful understanding of our world. And over the last 15 years, I have been on an incredible journey through more than 60 countries, from Paris to Peru, from the streets of New York to Mount Kilimanjaro, from the Taj Mahal to the Great Wall of China. And although these places have been interesting, it is the people that I've met along the way who have had the most profound impact on me. And nothing has affected me more completely or wounded me more deeply than witnessing the needless suffering caused by absolute poverty. My first intimate in poverty came in June 2006 when I decided to travel to India to volunteer for the summer. And it was there that I met Sierra. During my time there, I worked with street children who survived on picking through mounds of garbage to get enough to eat. And although I worked with dozens of children, Sierra stood out amongst the rest. She was intelligent and funny and had a tremendous desire to learn. And most days I would sit down and I would help Sierra with her homework. And on one occasion, she invited me to visit her family in the slums. A little surprised by the invitation, I immediately said no. At that point, I cared about her too much. And I was afraid. I was afraid that I couldn't handle seeing how she lived. I was worried that these images would haunt me forever. But she was persistent, so she kept on asking. And eventually I swallowed my fear and I went, and I was surprised at what I saw. This is a photograph I took of Sierra and her family outside of their home. She's the one in the hat. And as you can see, this image is much different than the images we are often exposed to. She is full of laughter and life and hope. Leaving India, I was determined to find a way to ensure that Sierra had the resources she needed to complete her schooling. And so I returned to my community and I shared her story. And with the help of a number of teachers and students, we raised enough money to send not only Sierra to school, but 50 other children as well. My first encounter with poverty taught me two things. The first is that although we can close our eyes to the things we do not want to see in our world, you can change the channel, you can close your computer. You cannot close your heart to the things that you do not want to feel. And perhaps more importantly, I learned that our small actions can literally change the course of people's lives. So, if so little is needed to help 50 children in India, why do we still live in a world in which millions live in poverty? This question really began to bother me. And so I went and I bought all the books I could find about poverty. In a desperate attempt to find solutions, I began traveling through South America and Asia and Africa, building homes for the homeless, volunteering in drop-in centers, visiting AIDS clinics and leper hospitals and refugee camps. And it was through this experience that I learned in a large part it all came back to Sierra. I learned that the most powerful agent of change on our planet can be an educated child, and especially an educated girl. 5 years ago, sitting in a coffee shop, I began writing all of this in an email. I wrote about how education is the great equalizer, how it is fundamental to human development and one of the most basic of all human rights. I wrote about my experiences, what I had seen and how it affected me. And I shared my dream to live in a world in which where you are born does not determine whether you get to go to school. I poured my heart into a long email. I entered 50 email addresses and I clicked send. And I waited and I worried. Have you ever had a dream or a belief that you held deep within you, but you were too afraid to share? You were afraid of what people might say. I was worried that people would think I was crazy. This idea of building schools around the world seemed impossible. But then an amazing thing happened. I got my first response, and I rushed to open the email, and it read, "Dear Jeffrey, I believe in your dream. You can do it. Love, Mom." Yeah. Yeah, she's the only one that calls me Jeffrey. But thankfully, it wasn't long before we got our second response and our third and our fourth. We built a website, and we decided our first school was going to be in Kenya. And then a second amazing thing happened. Within the course of just a few months, we raised enough money to build our first school in Amori Joy, Kenya. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity of visiting that school. And when I arrived, all of the teachers lined up to shake my hand. I met some adorable students and a very proud principal named Philip, of 450 students, in which half are girls. I also met an entire village in school with the same haircut as I have. Since then, we have been busy building schools in Kenya, in Sri Lanka, in Nicaragua, in Ecuador, and in Ghana. And today, 700 students attend class in schools that we have built. And in 10 years, over 7,000 students will have received an education in one of our schools. It is amazing to think that you may be the first generation in all of human history that will witness a world in which everyone has the basic living standards that we take for granted every day. But even better than this is we are part of a larger global trend that is winning the war against poverty. Since the year 2000, the number of people living in poverty on Earth has been cut in half. An astonishing 4.2 billion people have gained access to clean drinking water. And 45 million children have received access to an education. But for me, the best part, I mean the really good stuff, are still the individual stories. A few years ago in Yapala, out of a community of 700 people, only 16 could read. 6 women and 10 men. And this is where students sporadically attended school. But today, Yapala has a new school for 150 children. And attendance is up for boys and for girls. Sitting in the front of one of those classrooms is Sakina Fusini. She is 9 years old. She loves to read, and she's one of Yapala's best students. She dreams of being a nurse one day, a life that was unimaginable just a few years ago, a life in which she can choose when to get married, how many children to have, a life in which she can get food and the medical treatment her family needs, and a life in which her daughter can go to school. I know I don't need to stand here this afternoon and convince you to care. I know you do. But we need to stop being afraid to try. It is not a lack of compassion that keeps 58 million children out of school and living in poverty. It is a lack of action. I have shared my story with you in a hope that you begin to realize actions you take today and throughout your life will impact the course of human civilization for generations. Each of you is able to do beautiful things in this world. And every day that passes is one less day for you to share your gifts with others. I will end with the words of an individual who grew up in rural Africa. And he didn't attend a big, beautiful school like this. He went to class every day in a tiny one-room schoolhouse. And armed only with his education and his dreams, he went on to change his community, change his country, and change the world as we know it. His name is Nelson Mandela, and I'm sure you are familiar with his story. He once said that overcoming poverty is not a task for charity. It is an act of justice. Poverty is man-made, and overcoming it and eradicating it can be achieved through the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. I believe that you can be that generation our world so desperately needs. A generation of global citizens that is willing to open up their eyes, but more importantly, their hearts to all humanity and begin taking responsibility for creating a world that you want to live in, a world that you are proud to live in. Thank you. Thanks.